What the
Hey,
heck?
Giuseppe.
Hey, where's my video? What's up with this? Can I start video?
I don't know. I can't see your video. I'm gonna.
Oh, here, let me see what's going on here. I may have to where okay, here we go. Used by another application. Oh, that's weird. Oh no. Oh, that's it. Okay, I gotta do this. Shut this down. I may have to let me reboot real quick. Okay.
What you need to do, man.
All right, I'll be right back.
So we are live, and we're getting off to a banging start here today as I try to adjust the studio here. And give me 1 second. You're getting the bird's eye view here. I'm trying to just get a good angle on these lovely women from Ukraine who are going to, I guess, engage with battle with the Russians. So welcome to another edition of the Friday. Again, why don't we play that intro and let's get started. All right, that gets us going here a little bit. Nice little introduction, intro music. So the reason why I opened the doors early is because I want to play you a video. And Russ is going to be joining us at the top. So I want to make sure that I have the most use of his time and expertise because he's actually on the ground in Europe. And he might be able to give us some interesting insights. And just in general, because Russ has been carving away at the global game, dissecting the Logan press for the better part of a decade. He's been on this show before. This is the first time we'll have Giuseppe and Dave on the show. I've been on their show once. So I'm gonna start this video and play this. And when we come out, we'll bring Giuseppe and hopefully Dave, and then Russ will be here. This is a pretty important video because piece of information. So let me just go back and bring it in here. You know, I was listening to Victor David Hansen, and it was a very good video. I actually like Victor David Hansen. He comes out of the Hoover Institute, but he's still fairly good at what he does, I will have to say. All right, let me go back here. So I think it's back here. Nope, there, hold on. We're getting off to a good start today, aren't we? My internet connection has been wonky, pretty wonky lately. Okay, we're there. All right. Let me track down this video. God, I had it all queued up and ready to frickin' go. And I got to find it again. Hold on. I know Lynn got on my case for this. Okay, looks like Giuseppe's here. There's the Ukraine multicam, which I've been watching. Let's do this. Let's do this. And I had this thing all lined up, and I got hooked into Victor Davis Hansen. Let me do this. There it is. Voila. All right. So I'm going to hook this video up. You guys are going to watch the 11-minute primer on how we got to where we are today. This will give you sort of the background and the bones of how this thing started. It's a pretty easy video to wrap your head around. I'm going to let Giuseppe in, and I'm going to start the video first, and then I'm going to let him in. Okay, here we go. The 2014 American coup in Ukraine.
To expand NATO and absorb former Warsaw Pact nations and even former Soviet republics. Efforts then focused on conquering the large former Soviet Republic of Ukraine. The Russians had found Ukraine unproductive, corrupt, and troublesome, so granted it independence in 1991. The American Empire plotted to absorb Ukraine into NATO and sent military units to Ukraine to bolster the Ukrainian army, with plans for building American military bases there. This culminated with an American-instigated coup in Ukraine in 2014 that led to bloody fighting and major economic disruptions. Ukraine is a new nation with complex problems caused by borders drawn during the Soviet era. In 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland and seized half of its land. This area was invaded by Germany 2 years later, which formed Ukrainian military units that murdered over 100,000 Poles during the war. After World War II, the Polish regions were formally annexed by Soviet Ukraine after 1.5 million Poles were forcibly deported. Over the next decade, another 1.5 million Poles were deported to ethnically cleanse these regions. Eastern Ukraine includes a large number of ethnic Russians, who are the majority in the Donbass region that was attached to Ukraine in 1922. Russian Crimea was added in 1954. The Russians in these regions were not consulted since Ukraine was ruled by Moscow. Russians and Ukrainians coexisted peacefully until the American Empire began to promote Ukrainian nationalism. Russians were blamed for Ukraine's economic problems, and the solution promoted was to join NATO. The Empire conquered Eastern Europe. It dispatched non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that pretended to act as charities but were secretly funded to instigate protests and riots. These were employed in the successful coups in Serbia and Georgia, and included American billionaire George Soros's Open Society Foundation and the Washington-based Freedom House, whose chairman was former CIA Director James Woosley. These coups involved generous financing from the U.S. government's National Endowment for Democracy, an agency created by Ronald Reagan in the 1980s to topple governments. Yanukovych rejected the idea of joining NATO, so the American empire dispatched its NGOs to instigate protest and random violence. This was a huge effort that involved $5 billion in funding. Victoria Nuland was Vice President Dick Cheney's foreign policy advisor. She somehow became Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs in the Obama administration and openly orchestrated a coup.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland. Victoria just recently returned from Kiev and has an update on the situation. Victoria?
Still jet-lagged from my third trip in 5 weeks to Ukraine and my days in Kyiv earlier this week. I don't have to tell this crowd that these are historic and challenging times for the people of Ukraine, for the Ukrainian-American relationship, and for people everywhere who care about the future of that great country. The world is watching the drama that is unfolding in the center of Kyiv. The Euromaidan movement has come to embody the principles and values that are the cornerstones for all free democracies. What began on November 24th as a protest against President Yanukovych's decision to pause on the route to Europe a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. Today, there are senior officials in the Ukrainian government, in the business community, as well as in the opposition, civil society, and the religious community who believe in this democratic and European future for their country. And they've been working hard to move their country and their president in the right direction.
Nuland is seen here with American Secretary of State John Kerry in February 2014, meeting with Ukrainian coup plotters in Germany. The Americans selected Ukrainian's next prime minister, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, pictured across from Kerry. Yats is our guy, Nuland declared in a phone call to U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt. Shot back, quote, "Fuck the EU." Nuland's phone call was secretly recorded and released, causing great embarrassment to the Obama administration. Nuland and Ambassador Pyatt openly encouraged protests and passed out snacks to dupe protesters in the Ukrainian capital just before the coup. Ukrainian Premier Viktor Yanukovych refused to order troops to fire on the mobs and fled as Nuland's team took over Ukraine. Her arrogance shocked diplomats and European leaders. The coup led to violence and killed European support for admitting Ukraine into the European Union and NATO. Absorbing Ukraine would weaken European security and provide no economic benefit. The American empire was furious, as her spokesman later revealed during President Trump's impeachment hearings when they made absurd claims to justify the coup.
Our strategic aim for the entirety of my Foreign Service career is not possible without a Ukraine whole, free, and at peace.
Ukraine is a strategic partner of the United States, important for the security of our country, as well as Europe. Ukraine is on the front line in the conflict with the newly aggressive Russia.
Millions of Ukrainians refused to accept the overthrow of their democratic government by the American empire. Ethnic Russians protested and hundreds were beaten and some killed by Ukrainian nationalists. Russians in eastern Ukraine took up arms and blocked roads into their region. American Vice President Joe Biden arrived in Ukraine in April 2014 to encourage a so-called anti-terrorist operation against Russian rebels. Russia provided some military equipment to help these but retreated after some bloody clashes, resulting in a stalemate. Ukraine's trade with Russia was disrupted and caused more economic problems. Russia announced that it would no longer provide natural gas to Ukraine at a heavily discounted rate. Ukraine would have to pay the European rate, which it could not afford. The Ukrainian economy suffered as its citizens became aware of the American coup. Russia did not want to rule Ukraine, which is why it allowed independence. Nevertheless, the American empire claimed that Russia had invaded Ukraine and caused the bloodshed. American corporate media lies when it states that Russia invaded Crimea. This region was part of Russia since 1783, until it was administratively attached to Ukraine in 1954 by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. People in Crimea, and Russian is the common language. The 1997 Russian-Ukrainian partition agreement allowed Russia to keep 25,000 troops in Crimea for defensive purposes. In 2014, after years of Ukrainian political turmoil and an American coup, Russia accepted a request by the Republic of Crimea to rejoin Russia after 94% of its citizens voted in favor. Russian troops didn't invade Crimea, they were already there. Crimeans were puzzled by intense American opposition to this reannexation, and rightly concluded the Americans wanted NATO military bases in strategic Crimea. Adding Ukraine to NATO remains attractive to the American empire, since it's the second largest nation in Europe by area, with 42 million people. The United States has provided Ukraine with $1.5 billion in military aid since 2014, to include $250 million in 2019. A search of the U.S. Army's website provides a list of 349 news articles, linked below, about U.S. Army operations in Ukraine in just the past 5 years. The 2014 American coup in Ukraine was an act of war against its people that toppled its democratically elected government. Permanent American military bases in Ukraine may eventually appear, but America's leading warmonger, Senator John McCain, was furious that Crimeans escape. In 2014, he openly expressed disappointment at the lack of political support for NATO military action against Russia to conquer Crimea, even though it may have resulted in a world war.
So we have no military obligation here to defend Ukraine. And do you think there is a military option, even if we had an obligation?
I'd love to tell you that there is, Andrea, but frankly, I do not see it. I'm glad to see our U.S. military naval presence in the Black Sea. Again, I wish that there were, but.
Okay, so that's your primer. And before we bring our esteemed guests on for today, I want to go back and I want to look at one image here in this video. And if you were not paying attention, you will miss the fact that at the end of the table is a very familiar face, the red-headed peppermint patty, Jen Psaki. So she's at this meeting here with Victoria Nuland and Bob Kerrey, not Kerrey, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank now. But she's here, right there at the end of the table, right there, boom. So guess who's around now? Victoria Nuland. She's part of the Biden administration, and there's Peppermint Patty, John Kerry. I think there was a Bob Kerrey too, wasn't there? I think he was like from somewhere in the Midwest. I got the two of them.
He was a Nebraska senator.
That's right. I got the two of them mixed up because they kind of popped in at right around the same time.
Right.
Yeah. So, no, this guy is the husband of Teresa Hines, the condiment queen.
Yeah, John Kerry.
John Kerry, exactly. Yeah. So Bob Kerry got in my head there. But look, there's Psaki. And you know what's really funny? Somebody on Twitter said, it's not Psaki. Take a closer look. I'm like, what? That's not Psaki? Are you kidding me? And this is 2014, 2013. So we're talking, what, 8-9 years ago? Like, what does that tell you about the world we're living in? You know, like how people see the world or don't see the world, right? It's very
Agreed.
bizarre, very bizarre. Let me see if we can get all of our guys here on a gallery view, because we've got. I don't think Russ does video, but I bet Dave does. So
I think he would, but his computer was damaged in the move.
Oh, okay.
And he's still shopping for a new one.
So Dave and Russ, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello, and thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. It's great for all three of us to get together. Russ, are you there? Let me, I'm not getting any audio on Russ. So let's see what we got here. I know he doesn't do video, but
right.
Let's see. Could you send Russ a text? Because I know you can do that probably. Is that something you can do, Giuseppe?
I can send him a Skype message. I don't have his cell phone.
Yeah, why don't you do that if you can?
Sure.
Because I want to make sure that we get Russ in here on hour one. David, how's your move going, and how'd that mural turn out?
Oh, well, I'm back here in San Diego, and well, the mural turned out good. I'm done with the first one, and I'm just kind of waiting on further construction to start the second one. It'll be a while because there's a lot of work to be done before it's ready to be painted.
So for a number of people who are probably new to you and Giuseppe, let me just do a quick introduction. I came across Dave and Giuseppe probably pretty recently, like maybe breakdown sites on the internet. Russ does a great job. And so I would see these shows that Russ would be on. I'm like, well, let me go hear what Russ has to say. And he was showing up on your shows. And I'm like, wow, these two guys are awesome. And they've got great chemistry with Russ. It looks like Russ is back again. They've got great chemistry. So let me follow them a bit more. So the two of you do a show on Revolution Radio, and you both have your own shows. Giuseppe has his show, and Dave, you have your show. So Giuseppe, your show is later today, right? At 5 o'clock?
5 o'clock Central, 6 p.m. Eastern.
Right. And
yeah, it's
Dave,
called the Perfect Triangle. Yeah.
Perfect Triangle. Dave, your show is on Saturdays, right?
Yes, Saturdays from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Revolution Radio, Studio A. And so is Giuseppe's. His show is on Studio A as well.
Yep. And Giuseppe, you have your show streaming on Twitch. Dave, do you stream on Twitch too as well?
Yes. Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch, all three live.
Okay, there you go. So that's kind of the rough background. That's where you can find them. Dave just recently moved back from Ecuador to the United States, and Giuseppe is about to move to his new private Idaho. And let's see if we can get Russ in here. Russ, can you hear us? We're still having a bit of a connection issue with Russ, and I don't know why. I'm not getting any audio with Russ.
He just replied back with Zoom appears problematic.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Keep trying, Russ, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I've had Russ on the show here before with Zoom, and it's a bummer because I'd really love to have his
he's perspective. Guy.
Right, he's brilliant. Plus, he's in Europe.
Right, just down the road, and
he can give us some kind of boots on the ground observations. Well, why don't we start here, Giuseppe? Why don't we start with you? We're into this thing now since Wednesday. What's your initial take as to what do you think is happening here?
Well, my initial take is that you remember like in Star Wars and Star Trek movies and TV shows, they always seems like once a movie or every couple episodes, they place the lead characters in some type of Wild West like casino, and tavern where, you know, everyone is just doing whatever they can to run a scam, and they're all outside the law. To me, that's how Ukraine has been set up the last since the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, there's so much criminality there, organized crime. There's the U.S. has a major presence, multiple illegal bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and there's just so much despicable activity that goes on there. And so I think that Putin, especially for the eastern part of Ukraine, which really is Russia, and you know, it's an artificial distinction at this point. And so the synagogue of Satan, the Rothschild Empire, has been publicly stated they want to turn Ukraine into Israel too, and they want NATO. They want to put nukes there. There are nukes there already, but I don't know if they have the command codes or not, because that. And so the traitorous dual citizen Victoria Nuland Kagan, just a despicable subhuman, has essentially overthrew the legitimately elected government back in 2014 with the so-called color revolution strategy, at which point they installed their puppet, loyal to Israel, loyal to the United States, loyal to NATO, loyal to the globalists. And Putin kept saying, don't do this, you know, we need a buffer. And they didn't listen. And so Putin correctly identified the living glory hole, Joe Biden, as the ineffective, farcical, installed marionette of the globalist empire that he is. And he knew that he could act pretty much with impunity, but he's shown great reserve. But that's my take on it. I mean, it's laughable. NATO's irrelevant. They're a paper tiger. I mean, I think. What do you guys think?
Well, guys, good assessment, Giuseppe, and Robert. Thanks for having me on the show. What's so bizarre and strange is that we have this inverted world now, where Russia is telling the truth and America is telling lies about everything. And it looks like Edgar Casey got it right with his prediction so many years ago. And it's really incredible how this war really did begin in 2014, when Victoria Nuland, the wife of Robert Kagan of the Kaganovich family, who was directly involved in the original Russian communist revolution, went to Ukraine and started, throwing around magic shekels by the billions to sort of wake up sleeper cells and do a massive propaganda campaign, hiring mercenaries. And this all culminated in a so-called color revolution, where they actually hired snipers to shoot the crowd and then blame it on the government that was in power at the time. And then, of course, Groper Joe Biden took a trip there in 2014. So did Hillary Clinton and a whole cast of other nefarious characters. So this war really was kicked off in 2014. And essentially every demand that Putin has made has been more than reasonable. No country wants to have a hostile military force up against their border. And that's exactly what they've been trying to do with this whole Ukraine thing. And in closing, I would say that if things are playing out the way it looks like, which I think what's happening is this is a strategic military strike to defang the Ukrainian army. If this unfolds as quickly as it looked like it's going to send a shockwave of fear throughout all of NATO and all of the West, because they're going to see that the Russian army is nothing to play around with, and they're actually far superior in a lot of ways to the Western military, both in strategic planning and execution of their plans as well.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Let's see if Russ has been able to fix his audio issues. Russ, are you there? No, he's here in spirit. Can you guys see the? What's that?
I see him as muted. Maybe if he would unmute.
I asked him to unmute, so I've done that twice.
Okay.
Can you see this map here that I've put up?
Yes, Khazaria.
Yeah. So this is the original Khazaria, which is located within the Ukrainian borders. And I begin to see why this is a very important area and region for these people, right? It's also really fascinating. There is a natural boundary that runs right through Ukraine, and it's this river, which basically splits the country into two. So you have Donetsk and Kharkiv and Luhansk. They're on the other side of the river, right? And rivers are usually what are used to denote borders. So there's already a natural border there. Hopefully we can bring Russ back into the mix here and give one more shot. Let me give people a visual of Russ's website. If you haven't found Winter Watch, I highly recommend it. And maybe there's an article that we can glean here with what Russ has put up, and maybe we can begin to discuss it. So
Robert, have you mentioned previously the rather stunning news in the last few weeks that out of Israel, there were news articles claiming that the modern citizens of Israel are not from the original tribe of the Middle East. They're actually Khazarians, and they're owning that now. So
yeah, they are. That's been going on for a while. Yeah, they're saying, "Hey, look, this is where we come from." Right? Arthur Kessler wasn't selling a fairy tale. Because Kessler wrote.
They denied it for years, though.
They have denied it for years.
And Robert, I thought you made a really good point about that river being the natural boundary. There's a lot of speculation that what Putin intends to do is sort of divide the country into two, take Kiev and topple the government, and then have elections with a new government that's not a puppet to the West. So. And create a buffer zone away from the hostile forces that NATO was trying to bring directly onto the border of Russia.
So this is an interesting idea here. So let's say, for instance, I may blank out. My internet's been really weird lately. So let's say, for instance, Putin is successful with this. And what if they relocate the capital of Ukraine on the other side of that border? What if Kharkiv becomes the new capital of Ukraine? I mean, strategically, that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it?
I'm here, guys, by the way.
Hey, Russ is here.
Welcome to the show, Russ. Glad you could figure it out. So have you been following along here?
Well, I haven't heard your conversation.
So let me give you just a kind of a brief update. I played a short 11-minute film which detailed the
I saw that.
The coup, right? So you saw that, okay?
Yeah.
And we were talking about what's been happening in terms of strategic moves, what Putin's been doing. We talked about how there is this relationship with Khazaria and Ukraine, that there's a natural boundary, which is this river which runs through Ukraine. We talked a little bit about Victoria Nuland and Kagan, who are essentially Russia because Stalin wanted to kill them. They went to Mexico and Trotsky got an ice pick, and the rest of them moved to the United States and resettled in Chicago. So these are the people that we're dealing with. So I think that gets us up to speed here a little bit. Russ, maybe you can give us some sense as to what's happening in your part of the world.
What I've been kind of following on this is what I call the wag the dog aspect. And because I've really been focusing on Twitter, and there's a particular news agency out of Kiev that kind of runs their narrative. And so I've been looking at the narrative and trying to determine what's real and what's not, because I suspect there's an awful lot of wag the dog. For starters, it's very interesting that you couldn't even watch Vladimir Putin's speech. You can't get it on Google. I couldn't find it. I got kind of a transcript of it through Sputnik, what he actually said, and little clips of it. Wouldn't you think that people here in the West should at least have the opportunity to watch the guy's speech and hear what he actually said? Right. I thought that was my starting point. And so the actual details of the speech, he's no mention of an invasion, no mention of actually sending the tanks rolling into the Ukraine proper. other than this Donbass area. And they confirmed that they were hitting the air bases and facility throughout the country. So that's pretty much everything that Putin laid out. He said the military infrastructure, air defense facilities, airfields, air forces are going to be neutralized by high precision weapons. And they said there'd be no threats to the civilian population. So they're very specific about what this operation was going to be. And he authorized the military to conduct a special operation to protect Donbass, which is the Russian ethnic area that you covered in the opener. And we have no plans to occupy Ukrainian territory. So I'm holding him to that standard, kind of trying to be neutral, trying to be fair to everybody, and figure out what's really going on. And it looks to me that the West really puppet government in Kiev is twisting the story around. And I'm not so sure that there's actually a true invasion underway. It looks like they did go up and take that airfield, that air cargo airport up north of Kiev. So they are doing like special operations to seize key strategic locations. But have you guys seen any sign of I mean, I've seen a lot of grainy footage as usual, stuff that doesn't add up, like a rocket that's sort of stuck in the middle of the street in Kharkiv. I mean, did a truck drive by at night and just drop that off there? It kind of reminds me of like 9/11. And rows of a nice neat row of Russian tanks that have been destroyed in Kharkiv. So they're making it look like Kharkiv is being fought over. And if it is, then it kind of violates what Putin said.
So you're there in the Euro Theater. What is the local, what's the media like in Prague? How are they disseminating this event?
Well, there are people here are fearful of Russians, particularly in this instance. They don't really know how to separate reality from wag the dog.
Right.
That's important. It's important to separate this wag the dog nonsense and theater that goes on all the time versus what's real. This is what I've been trying to do. So my rolling post that I've had the last couple of days has been attempting to do that. I've got live stream webcams. You can go to Kharkiv and see what's going on in that city. You go in Donbass, you go to Odessa, you can go to Kiev. They seem to panic a bunch of people. They got them down in subway stations. They've got them fleeing Kiev. Why would people flee Kiev?
Yeah, why? Good question.
You have potentially airstrikes going on. Why would you leave your apartment building in Kiev and get on a highway and head down the road? I think that would be the last thing I would do. I was kind of batting down. And if things did get bad enough, I'd go down the subway, but there's no signs of any air raids or attacks on Kiev itself.
Yeah, I've been watching those multicams from Kharkov, Dnipro, Odessa, and Kiev. Not much.
Well, I have one example of what I call possible wag the dog footage of the airport bombing at Ivano-Frankivsk, which is Western Ukraine. That's the kind of the real Catholic, pro-European portion of Ukraine. And it shows this missile hitting the airport. And I noticed the first 5 seconds, it flies by a little truck and it doesn't have Ukrainian Cyrillic lettering on
it. So what kind of lettering does it have on it, or any lettering at all?
Does the phrase "Yulehu" ring a bell?
That is really funny.
It just looks like a totally staged photo opportunity.
I am trying to desperately get this. I've been trying all morning. I have an image of a tank. Let me see if I can find it here. Just put it up here. This is pretty ridiculous. It's a tank that's supposedly invading Russia. And let me fire this up here. It's I can't really get it. I don't know if you guys can see it, but hold on.
By the way, Hostomel is where they really had a battle, apparently. Even the Russian sources have acknowledged that. So they've fessed up to going there.
Can you see this tank?
Yes.
I mean, what the hell is going on here? This is a tank that they're claiming is invading the right. If you look at the tank, the top of the tank is made out of wood. Look at this. I mean, and there are two of them, and they're using this as a pretext for a Russian tank invasion.
They got the B
It's like a tank from the hood.
And it looks
it's old too.
Yeah, it looks like the front, the armor is a bunch of cell phones that are attached together, right? And you just see their backside, like that black part in the front. I mean, this is what we're talking about. Total wag the dog experience.
Well, they're trying to make it look like they're going into with this area called Kherson. Now, Kherson is not really ethnic Russian. Well, it partly is ethnic Russian. See, there's these areas in Russia that are being contested, including Kharkiv, because that's like half Ukrainian and half Russian. And that would be pretty aggressive to go after these contested areas, because there's a lot of the Ukraine that really needs to be resolved, I think, by plebiscite. International. It's not something you just invade and take. You can secure your strong Russian ethnic areas. I think there's good cause for that. But once you start going into Kharkov, which is a big and populated area, big industrial base, and you start fighting there, that's asking for trouble, because you're going to have these people at their throats. Ukrainian against Russian. That's a really bad outcome. And same with this area down north of the Crimea called Kherson. And they show this tank rolling into Kherson, into this town in Kherson. This is outside of Crimea. So they're really kind of making it look like they're skirting into these really disputed areas, heavily disputed areas.
And you think this is real? This is not wag the dog footage?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but I can see there's an attempt to make it look like that's what Russians doing. That they're attacking from all directions and just rolling across the border all over the place. And it doesn't look like that's what's happening. And now the narrative is that they're going to take paratroopers into the airport there and basically head into the government center and try to seize the government through a military coup d'etat of Russians. That's pretty aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's a. Wait for my internet thing to work out here again. I think that's another, wag the dog kind of moment, right? That's propaganda, really. I think there's a lot of propaganda. Russ, you talk a lot about the Logan press on your website. Can you break that down for people, what the Logan press is?
Well, that's German for lying press. So that goes back to the 19th century. Everybody kind of associates it with the Nazis, but it's been around long before then. It's been in common use even at the turn of the last century to, people that are pointing at the press of manipulating events and lying.
So, and part of your work, and you state that very clearly on Winter Watch, is to basically break down and deconstruct the Logan press. Yeah.
Now, the Logan press in Ukraine is called UATV English. You might want to follow that because they're really putting out CGI. Here's another one of a large column of Russian armored forces burned to the ground. It says a desolate sight going toward Kherson direction. So you see what they've done? They've kind of combined this Kherson with defeat of this Russian column. And they drive by it, and it just looks like the same grainy stuff we see. You and I have talked about it before. We all talked about it. Everybody here, Giuseppe. So that's a CGI. They're running CGI images on that one. I'm convinced of that. Now, here they have the destruction of a radar facility in Mariupol, which is in Donbass. That's probably going on. That's within the confines of what Putin talked about in his speech, what they were going to hit. They're going to degrade the military ability of the Ukrainian military to, quote unquote, pacify them. So they're going to reduce their military capability. And I think they're kind of basically saying, you want to fight us, we'll fight, but we're just asking you to lay down arms. Meanwhile, we're going to degrade all your command and control and support. They're doing that all over the Ukraine. That's different from an invasion.
Yes, I would totally agree. Yes, absolutely. So I've been following, and I think Russ might be following this YouTube channel as well. You got these live cameras from Ukraine, and it's quite interesting because the Kiev camera has now been almost completely whited out. It was not like this.
Right.
You were able to actually see it in full living color like the rest of these cities. And I've been following it during the day, during the night.
It's like watching paint dry, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like, what's going on here? It's like, there's really, like last night I was watching it snow in Kharkov. That was pretty interesting. But there's nothing happening here, right? There's no there right now. And yet the Sturm und Drang here on this side of the world, the cacophony couldn't be louder.
Yeah, here's another UATV English story. Situation is difficult to control. Ukrainian authorities in the Kharkiv region destroyed a Russian military convoy. So they have a picture of a burned out tank with a dead Russian soldier lying on the pavement. You know, what is this? Wag the dog, or is it real media looking into this? Neutral media? Like,
yeah, it's doubtful.
Does it even exist?
Yeah, to me, we're in that Orwellian phase where one day we're fighting against trans Eurasia or trans Europa or whatever, and then the next day they're on our side, right? There's
right,
like who the enemy is or where the battle's being fought, because there's so much confusion, and by design, so that and sometimes the CGI stuff can be really good. And sometimes it's a little suspect. It all depends on.
Yeah, I mean, I would think the A-team would be involved here, and they're definitely panicking the people. So they got everybody spooked and going down into these subway shelters in Kharkiv and Kiev, and those are the two cities I think to really focus on for obvious reasons. Kharkiv is a split city, and it's a large city, and it's an important prize, and ultimately maybe Russia does want to take that area. But they got a large Ukrainian population to deal with there. It's not easy situation.
So what I want to do is I just want to go around quickly. I want to get each one of your takes on Putin. And who do you think Putin is, and what do you think his intentions are? Let's start with you, Giuseppe. What's your take on Putin?
I think Putin is KGB trained. I think that the Rothschild globalist empire thought they had him in their back pocket. And I think that he has been playing his own game as to amassing power, systematically removing the parasitical Jewish oligarchs, the Russian Jewish mafia oligarchs. And he worked out with a couple of others to let them stay there as long as they pay him royally. So Putin has made himself into like a Gaddafi-like character. He's serving the interests of his people. I think we've had Matthew Raphael Johnson on Scorpio show multiple times, and who's a PhD in Russian studies and history, and he believes that Putin is actually a Russian Orthodox Christian, and that he really is loyal to Russia, not to the globalists. So, I mean, and then you see him with all these globalist operatives. So it's a tough read, but to me, I think he is systematically trying to do what's in Russia, the nation's best interest. And so I think he realized that he didn't have to fear the United States. He didn't, everything surrounding the Rothschild in Israel is all deception and farce. They'll never fight you directly. They do everything by putting a knife in your back or trying to push you down a flight of steps there. So he realized accurately that there would be no actual ramifications other than economic sanctions and such if he went and took care of business and secured Ukraine to not be a threat, because they ridiculously, the globalists think that they can put Ukraine in NATO, which is like China saying, "Oh, we're with Mexico now. We're putting Chinese nukes right across from El Paso." So, I mean, that's, I think Putin's doing what he has to do to take care of his country and also feather his nest at the same time.
That seems like a pretty fair assessment. What about you, Dave? Let's put some of your Scorpio X-ray vision into this.
Well, that really is the question of the hour, isn't it, Robert? I think it is a difficult read because, on the one hand, Putin has done a lot of things that are certainly in Russia's national interest. And the way Paul English put it is that Putin is the least worst player on the world stage. And, Putin, unfortunately, played along with this COVID hoax narrative. So, it seems that no matter how independent a world leader may be, the international banking cabal has their talons in every one of these world leaders to some degree. But I do believe Putin has gone off script, and he's a bit of a wild card right now. He's not fully under control. And as far as what's going on in Ukraine right now, it's a hard read, but it looks to me what is happening is that Putin is essentially defanging the Ukrainian military, which I think he has every right to do. And nobody with any nationalistic tendencies wants to have a hostile military force up against their border. And as Giuseppe pointed out, having Ukraine be part of NATO is just insanity. Ukraine's never really even been part of Europe, not culturally. Yeah. So why would it possibly be part of NATO? It's been part of Russia historically. So again, there's just no clear read on Putin, but that's what I would say. He's done a lot more good than bad for his country.
Right. And the big deal was when they were basically saying, no, we're not sure we want to be part of the EU. I mean, that was really the thing that got the Euromaidan. And how much did they spend? Was it $5 billion?
Yeah, $5 billion.
$5 billion on a coup. Like, what could $5 billion have done in the United States?
Right.
Right. If you invested $5 billion on the border of the United States, I mean, just think of what could have come out of something like that. But that's another timeline. Russ, what's your take on?
Well, I think he has he's been around a long time. He is KGB. He is an actor to an extent. That kind of explains the COVID policy, but he also knows the chessboard really well. I think he has a very solid understanding of Russia's position in the world, the moves that Russia needs to do to preserve its sovereignty, and recognition that they are being attacked.
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
a big offensive by these neocons against the Russians. I don't know entirely the reason for it. I see no reason why relations with Russia can't be reasonable, but there's just these bad elements, neocons, that have targeted them. And Putin's had to recognize that if he's going to be their leader, and he has to move his pieces around the chessboard. So I think he's highly competent. I don't know. It remains to be seen what exactly happens in the Ukraine with this operation, if he was lying in his speech. But I took the speech seriously, and that's kind of what I'm looking at. And so far, I don't see indication that he's been dishonest. That could change quickly. Kharkov, Kiev, this Kherson area, these key flashpoints, depending what Russia really does militarily, not the wag the dog stuff, that they really do, then that'll kind of answer a lot of the questions about his motive. And he could just be a warmonger, just say, hey, I'm going to take the whole country. It looks to me like he wants regime change or get somebody at least neutral. That's what the Ukraine really needs. They need to be like Finland.
Yeah, they've got to have a firewall on the West, right? I mean, they've been, basically tossed around like a $2 hooker, unfortunately, right? And that's really what happened. They got in there, they being the neocons, Vicky Nuland, Kagan, and of course you had Hillary Clinton right around that time, Joe Biden. And what do they start doing? They start exploiting the Ukrainian economy. They go in with Burisma. They're doing money laundering. The Israelis get into trafficking with these beautiful Ukrainian women. It just really becomes a very dark place. Their economy goes to shit, right? So they come in and basically, get into an abusive relationship with the Ukraine, and they put an actor in charge of the whole thing. That says something, right? And this is what they've been living with. They've been living with a fake government, a proxy government, a kind of a semi-colony of the United States and Israel in that area.
Yeah, to be used and abused. And
yes,
and it works that way with Russia too, to an extent. Now, Russia's been kind of in the outs in the Ukraine, but there's a period going back, I forget the guy's name, the guy that they booted out.
In Russia or in Ukraine?
In Ukraine, before I forget his name.
Yeah, it's Yanushchenkov, is that his name?
Right, so he's a Russian puppet.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just using and abusing Ukraine. And
go ahead, Russ.
That's it. That's my main point.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is, I think timing, numbers, synchronicities are fascinating. The day that Yanushchenkov left was 2/22/2014, right? Is that interesting? 2/22/2014. You had 8 years to 2014, and you get 2/22/2022, because it was 8 years ago when that happened.
Well, Ukraine kind of reminds me of the United States. They can't find anybody in a country of 44 million people. It's nationalistic, cares about the people. They have some ethnic difficulties, but I know Ukrainians. I mean, I won't get into my personal life or anything like that, but the story I get from them is the Russians and the Ukrainian ethnics have always gotten along until the neocons came in and started poisoning the well.
That's usually the case.
Right. They consider themselves brothers and sisters. And now you have neighbors at each other's throats.
So this is a little off topic, but it's on topic. Russ, you've been around athletics most of your life. You've witnessed diverse groups work together, play together, right? It was not a big deal. Now, all of a sudden, it's a big deal. Now, all of a sudden, we're in this country having to deal with the same issues that, say, the Ukrainians and the Russians are having to deal with these synthetic kinds of conflicts that are being staged against people inside of a working group and being turned against one another.
Yeah, classic Sabbatean Frankist new underworld order stuff.
That's absolutely right. You're absolutely. And even so, this I was following this Twitter thread, and who was it? It was somebody on like Black Progressive Twitter or something like that. Oh no. Okay, I know. It was the
Robert froze up. Are you guys still there?
I'm here.
I am here, sir.
I guess we'll until he unfreezes, we could.
He was on a roll there.
He was on a roll. It was going somewhere. Maybe the Rothschilds are using a new weapon that freezes his time. So he's literally been frozen for telling too many truths. Well,
okay, I'm back. There he is. Yeah. So what I need to do is I'm going to close a bunch of windows, and hopefully this is going to help my. But I've been having like serious issues with my internet lately. Anyway, I was watching The View. I don't really watch The View. It was a clip.
The View.
It was a clip from The View, and again, maybe I got cut off for a reason. And this is no slight or offense to any of the wonderful female listeners that watch this show, but The View is like one long menstrual cycle, right? I mean, that's what it really comes down to. And there was this woman on The View, and she was opining. It's like they've placed these women inside the media to become emotional, like they're emotional drivers of these situations. And again, I love women. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I know a lot of great women, a lot of one, but they've deployed women in the media to drive these emotional narratives.
Right.
Right. This is all very strategic. So this woman on The View, she was opining about, oh my God, what about all the refugees? Think of the refugee crisis that's going to take place now. And I'm thinking, oh my God, thank God, at least they'll be white this time, right? It's like, I mean, we're looking for a little light in the darkness here, just a little bit, pun not intended. And by the way, I'm not being xenophobic, but it was kind of an ironic thing for her to mention that this is the new big thing that we're going to have to deal with these refugee crises, with this whole thing.
Well, if what Putin says that the civilians are not being targeted, will not be affected, and it's not going to spread that way, if this operation plays out right, where it's just a regime change, then he's going to look pretty good, because there won't be any refugees. There's no need to be bombing, civilians. And, there's one incident in Kiev today that they're really running with this. And, you notice the building that was kind of shattered in Kiev.
Yep.
But then you get the real story, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. And it turned out they shot down a Russian aircraft and it crashed into the apartment building. And so they're running that as the example of Russian terror.
Right. Well, we've seen them do.
Robert froze up again. So the point I think he was making, and your point is excellent, Russ. This is WAG. There he is. He's back. So.
And I just closed a bunch of windows, so hopefully this will be a little bit better.
Yeah, but we'll see. It's still unresolved. There could be a bunch of fighting and hard fighting and a vicious civil war. The Krakens could come out. I don't have the answer to that.
Right. So one of the things that it dawned on me is that if you go back and look at the 20th century, the Russians were the grand masters of chess in the 20th century. And the only guy that could really crack through was Bobby Fischer, who's a very interesting character, by the way.
Yes.
For not only his ability to heritage towards the end of his life, and became a real thorn in the side in terms of the Zionist-backed media. But all that taken into account, these guys are really smart, right? They know what they're doing. They are grand chess masters, and they're not going to make any moves that are going to sacrifice their position on the board. What are your thoughts, Dave? We haven't heard from you in a while.
Well, certainly, Bobby Fischer is the fascinating character, or he was. He converted to Christianity and renounced his, being a so-called Jew. Probably the greatest chess player of the 20th century, and someone that completely did a deep dive into the research of Jewish control. He went from media darling to pariah because he took the time to research what was going on, and he came to the obvious conclusion that these Zionist international Jews are running the banking system and creating suffering and problems around the world, and have been doing so for a very long time. And it's just interesting, the story of how Fischer ended up in Iceland, essentially being thrown in jail for playing chess. That's really what happened. He played an illegal game of chess and was thrown in jail in Japan and had to flee to Iceland. So it's a fascinating story, but it's interesting we'll see how this all plays out. I don't believe that Russia's doing a full-scale invasion. There'd be, as Russ pointed out, there's absolutely no reason to do indiscriminate bombing on the civilian population. Now, I'm noticing, if you look how the media is running with this picture of this one kind of gray-haired old lady with a bandage around her head, this proof that Putin is killing civilians or hurting people, but they don't really have very many other images. Just this one woman. That says a lot. They're having to run with one image in a huge so-called conflict. So I think it's clear that Putin's just going to take out the military. He's going to take out their ability to destroy the culture as well. I think we have a culture war going on here too, Robert. A fight for whether or not Ukraine will become part of the global Homo empire, or whether or not it'll sort of be part of the, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Christian civilization. That's the other undertow that's going on here.
Yeah, Putin addressed that very thing in his speech that nobody got to see, by the way. Here's what he said. The West is about pseudo values contrary to human nature and was an empire of lies. That's how he describes this culture war you're talking about. And he addressed the culture war. So he's kind of taken that angle, which, to be honest with you, kind of appeals to me.
Yeah, I mean, anybody with a clear sense of vision, if you're an American, and this is something I want to get into, Russ, we got about 5 minutes left with you, I think, and I do want to here. If you're an American who has a real sense of history, not the trite garbage that they feed you, not the patriotic American fries, right? I mean, the real history, you drill down and there's a lot of reckoning and reconciling that we have to do as Americans with these things that have been done abroad.
Yep.
And then we have to come out of this with a sense of, okay, that's happened, but I'm still an American. And what does it mean to be an American? And Russ, you're an American, you're an expat. And even though you live in Prague, you're one of the most American people that I've run across. What does it mean to be an American now? And what are the values of what a true American is? What are your thoughts, Russ?
It's just it's getting away from this moral relativism and a recognition that there is good and evil and right and good. And, okay, there's shades of things in there once in a while, but everybody has to create his own core beliefs and stand by them. What's right? I wrote an article here the other day about how the Americans essentially bombed the Sudan's pharmaceutical industry in 1999. Nobody even knows that story. It just set that country back on its pharmaceutical industry several decades on some kind of bogus chemical warfare nonsense.
Yep.
Just always lying, empire lies. I think Putin put it pretty well.
Yep.
And that's what we're facing with. That's what we're faced with as Americans. We have to kind of just recognize that, sad as it is.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to have some kind of reckoning with this, and then and we could probably get into the remedy for it, but we do have to come to some kind of We also have to come out of this thing with, well, what is it to be an American, and what are our values, and how do we promote them, integrate them, and make a stand moving forward? Giuseppe, what are your thoughts on this?
What a great penetrating question, Robert. My thoughts are that the satanic malignancy that is the synagogue of Satan has been a cancer that has been eating at the very fabric of the Republic of the United States since the early 20th century. And they really began to spread around 1913 when they compromised the traitor Woodrow Wilson, which allowed to the Federal Reserve being created, and then leading us into Rothschild-Bankster War I, commonly known as World War I, which a vast majority of real Americans did not want to become involved in. But again, the traitorous, disloyal United States government went along with the banking idea to punish Germany and Russia, and it's only gotten worse. This chicken swinging cancer has now infected every element of our society. And if you would think about it, you would think, well, the the parasitic Jew is the majority in this nation. So no wonder everything's Jewy-Jewstein. Well, the reality is they're barely 2% of the population. And you'd think that combined with everything Hebrew, you'd think that everything homo, because there's so many homos on TV, radio, movies, and they're so important. Well, you know what? They're barely 3% of the population. So what you have is all these fringe elements, these outliers who have figured out how to, led by the Zio-communist Jew, have figured out, like the cancer, the satanic cancer they are, how to eat away and infiltrate power. And so their huge overreach has been this COVID scamdemic to try and create this great reset, the build back better with little b's, as in 666, the new world order. They think they have it all so locked down in the first world that they can pull this off, and it's failing miserably. And so of course, as COVID now desperately being rebranded as COVIDs occurs, and people are waking up, well, what do we need? We need the Russian boogeyman has invaded and is starting World War III. Actually, they're not. They're doing very surgical strikes and wisely, as you said a few moments ago, Robert, building a firewall. And so what it means to be an American today is to live in a bizarre, schizophrenic, split reality, whereas the vast majority of people like us are good Americans, and we are being vilified, set up as the boogeyman of white supremacy, when in every instance of so-called white supremacy, it's Jewish supremacy. Jews controlled the slave ships. Jews ran slave auctions in the South. This is all documentable. I have photocopies and pictures of all the original newspapers that are outlining this. And so they're blaming us, the decent, real fabric and foundation of this nation, and these outliers, these toxic, dysfunctional, subhuman parasites, the Jew, the homosexual, the transsexual, all the, they have a right to do whatever they want. They don't have a right to have any power in a republic which offers democratic voting, and to steal elections, to fund traitors left and right. So to be an American is right now to fight for your very existence if you have our pigmentation.
Well, let me just add to what you're saying, not just your pigmentation or our pigmentation, because there are conservative Latinos, Latin Americans, right, blacks. This is what I'm trying to wrap my arms around about what it is to be an American, right? Mm-hmm. At this point, what do we affirm? Right. What are our values? And I think you began a dialogue there by stating what our values aren't. Right. And so I think those are excellent points. I have no disagreement with anything with what you said, but somehow we've got to distill something like more real and potent in terms of how we're going to aggregate a spirit, which in my lifetime has been hijacked and this other kind of simulacra, like with Bush, you're either with us or against us, right? To me, that was the fake ass phony patriotism that they were selling during that time. And that's not really what being an American is. That was just this prophylactic around this, kind of situation that we were having to deal with. Russ, I know you have to go. Do you have anything else you want to share before you split?
Just one observation, that those Slavic girls that you got on the screen behind you. Yeah. They're pretty nice looking, aren't they?
That's why I put them there. The motto for today is make love, not war.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. Russ, hey, thank you for being here. Take good care.
Bye-bye.
All right, Dave Scorpio, it's your turn. What is it like? What is it to be an American now? What are the values that we hold dear to our hearts and consecrate and amplify?
Well, that's another great question. I think we're seeing a bifurcation between what we see on television and what is emanating from the enemy war transmissions known as the mainstream media. We're seeing a bifurcation between that and what the average American actually believes and thinks on the streets. We're seeing two different realities, and the values that is being put forth by the the oligarch media and the so-called federal government that we have, essentially is that we have the right to choose between Moderna or Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson. It's your choice. Burger King or McDonald's, and Coke and Pepsi. And you can become any kind of weird pervert or degenerate that you choose. There's 57 genders or whatever it is now. You can be whatever you want. You can be whatever kind of pervert you want. Just don't question who runs the show and who's really in power. And so the second part of your question is, what are the real values? Well, essentially, like it or not, America was founded as a Christian nation, not a Christian Zionist nation, an actual Christian nation. I'm not saying that we need to return or become a theocracy, but you have to sort of attach yourselves to the underlying or basic tenets of the teachings of Christ and Christianity, much like Russia has returned to the Eastern Orthodox Church, because it provides sort of a framework of values by which the average person can navigate their lives. Because what we have now is just like, hey, if it feels good, do it. Be whatever kind of weirdo you want. And this is being promulgated by the international Jew, who wants to strip America of their fundamental core values. And that's what's going on. We are under attack by the global homo empire, essentially. And I think it's time to return to some basic fundamental values. And I think embracing Christianity, at least in part, is the only way forward. You're not going to create something out of the ether or create some great pagan movement. It's just not gonna happen. So I think that's the starting point, but it has to be completely removed from so-called Christian Zionism, a term that is essentially diametrically opposed. There's no such thing as Christian Zionism. That's a constructed belief system that's not real, and because the two things are diametrically opposed.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So we're talking about an organizing principle. We need an organized. Now you talk to somebody like Steve Bannon, and his bromide or his solution is nationalism, right? If we have a nationalistic point of view, right? If we rally around these ideas and goals of being a nationalist, then that becomes the organizing principle for any number of groups. But inside of that nationalistic kind of, umbrella, you'll find a lot of Christian Zionists. Steve Bannon's got a pretty deep history with Breitbart and the Mercer family, and he worked for Goldman Sachs. He's an interesting character. What are your thoughts on Steve Bannon, Giuseppe? Have you ever spent much time examining him and getting into his material at all?
I was fascinated by his acumen in hijacking, leading Donald Trump to hijack the Republican Party when, and it was just a brilliant move to essentially like a hostile takeover of a very corrupt. I never forget that first debate where there were like Trump and 18, mental and physical midgets, and he just savaged them all and harnessed, which could be the saving grace of this country, the patriot movement of conservative, real Christians. So I've always believed Bannon is an operative. He truly serves the globalists, and he is the controlled opposition in a most obvious fashion, in my opinion.
He's a pretty smart fucker, though, right?
Oh, no doubt. Absolutely. Yeah.
He's a sharp dude. What's your take on him, Dave?
Well, yeah, Bannon's a shrewd character for sure. He was one of the original investors in Seinfeld as well as the other Jewish connections you mentioned, Goldman Sachs, etc. So, he's shrewd. He is an intelligent man, certainly, but I think Giuseppe could very well be right. He is some kind of controlled opposition in a way, because we have to sort of look at this question of Zionist Jewish power. That has to be addressed. You can't just ignore it.
It's the elephant in the room. If you don't understand it, if you don't understand it, you're not paying attention.
Yeah, and it's not about hate. It's not about anything like that. But we have to examine this question of the overwhelming amount of power that Jews have captured in this country and around the world, and it's really because of the central banking cabal. That's where it all emanates from. And it's illustrated very well in this sort of the State Department. We have Anthony Blinken, Jew, Victoria Nuland, Jew, and this woman that's Mary Sherman that's doing the negotiating with Russia is also Jewish, and they've all been pushing for war with Russia.
Yeah, I think this is a real problem that every administration has dealt with. I would say probably post-Clinton, right? If you go back and look at Clinton's administration, you see some neoliberalism inside of the Clinton administration. You definitely had it. The young neocons were in the Reagan and Nixon administration. That's where Cheney and that's where Don Rumsfeld come out of. And by the time we get to Bush, it's a full-on mitzvah, full-on party, right? You've got the Project for the New American Century, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, William Crystal. By the way, these are all the sons of Bolsheviks.
Right.
These are all the sons of Bolsheviks. These are the people that ran the Russian Revolution in 1917, right? So their work continues, and they're still doing what they do. So my big contention is that, number one, we should not allow dual citizens to be able to serve in.
100% correct. That is absolutely should be ironclad rule.
Yeah, you cannot serve two masters.
Right. Absolutely. That is a brilliant observation. That should be law. That should be no way to get around that law. There he is. Yep. He's back.
Yeah. Do we just put a firewall on that, right? Again, I'll use that analogy. I apologize for the internet today, but for the last few days, man, it's just been touch and go out here because I live out in a rural area. But I think you're right. We need to have this organizing principle. I watch Jason Whitlock, and you may be familiar with him. He's a sports guy. He was on ESPN. He was on Fox. And when I first connected with his material, he was definitely more on the, I'm a black man with a chip on my shoulder. Right. And then over time, his political views and social views have evolved where he's looking at much more open aperture. And it's very interesting to kind of watch him and watch his evolution and his audience. And so he's been this magnet of bringing a kind of wide group of people together, again, with this understanding of, this American idea or this ideal of being an American. And what I have to work through is like when I watch his show, and he has a young guy on there named TJ Moe, who played college football at the university. He's a very bright young guy. Like if TJ Moe was my son, I kiss the freaking ground, right? Like this is my kid. So I'm not gonna chip away at his character, but when he talks about being an American, they roll out the history. Well, those who served and sacrificed their lives during World War II, people like Ted Williams, who enlisted during World War II, these were great Americans, or Pat Tillman, who enlisted after 9/11. So they roll this stuff out, right? Like these are the sacrifices that Americans in the past have made for where we are now. And that's a part that I really, run into. It's like, yeah, okay, I want to support you. I want to support your kind of pro-American ethos. But when you roll these fairy tales out,
well, they are fairy tales, Robert, once you unfreeze. And what's hilarious
the points at which he is freezing up.
Yeah.
The dual citizen comment, and then now what he's was trying to say.
Interesting. Yeah. Here he is. He's back.
Yeah. So, they are fairy tales, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, absolutely. And, the American military has been misused And you could easily make the argument that America was tricked. Well, actually, it's a historical fact that America was tricked into joining World War II. That's indisputable. If you read some of the books like Day of Deceit by Robert Stinnett, it proves beyond the shadow of a doubt, using primary source documents, that Pearl Harbor they knew it was coming. They did all they could to make it happen. And because America was firmly against being involved in World War II. 88% of the population in 1941 or 1940 was really very much against being part of World War II. So they had to trick America into joining. And ever since then, the American military has been misused by the globalists. So you're right. These are fairy tales. And, another thing I just wish more blacks would realize is that they are targeted by the communist Jews, essentially. They're targeted as a resource, as a people to be manipulated for their cause.
They're waking up. They're starting to get it. They're starting to figure it out.
And the Nation of Islam, think what you want about them, but they've done a great job of proving Jewish ownership of the slave trade. There's a series of books called The Secret Relationship Between Jews and Blacks, 4-volume set that really lays all this out. And it's really quite indisputable once you look at the evidence.
Well, the Monsanto family was one of the biggest slave trading families in the country at the time. Right. And I did a whole show on the NAACP, the roots of the NAACP, who started the NAACP, and how they employed W.E.B. Du Bois, who was essentially a communist homosexual. No, seriously, it's what he was.
I know. And you should probably point out that who started the NAACP was all Jews.
Well, there were a few non-Jews involved, to be fair, but they were socialists.
Right. Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was, kosher party. But they had an ideology that they shared. And the ideology is this socialistic / communistic ongoing march of change and revolution, which never ends.
Right. Well, they're a cancer.
Never ends. Yeah.
They're a cancer. And you just described the Jew and the Jew minion. I mean, that is what to this day is eating away at the fabric of every first world country, is just these narcissistic, psychopathic parasites who literally either intentionally or unintentionally serve some dark god, Satan, Baal, whatever you want to call it. But that is what's going on, and their arrogance to think that they can do Tiki Alam and redo the world, and it's all for their benefit. They whine like, oh, we need equality, and well, actually all they want is a buffer to facilitate their increased power, undeserved, like the satanic cancer they are, to take control of things that they have no business being in power with.
So here's my take. My take is that what we're dealing with is this Gnostic idea of an infestation, right? When we go back and we look at the story of potentially this thing that falls from heaven, right? Which looks like a piece of black rock. Hello.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And it falls from heaven. And Harold Katzavela, who happens to be Jewish, has talked about this. And he talks about how this black rock, which falls from heaven, contains the black goo. And the black goo is the thing that becomes this parasitic entity that infects people, right? And it starts with like an original group of people that come into contact with it. Why is the black cube venerated?
Right.
You see it in Mecca at the Kaaba. You see it in the third eye, right? When they wear the black cube on the third eye. There are black cubes all over the world.
Yes.
Why is that? Well, this is the source.
That is an excellent, insightful point, Robert, and we'll wait for you to unfreeze and continue. But that's just it.
Interesting timing here when he froze.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Yeah, I love how Robert's mind and investigations go. It's there he is. He's back.
Okay, so here's my take. My take is that this idea, this parasite that we're talking about, is transmissible through the social condition and social engineering.
Interesting.
So if you want this idea of power, or you want this idea of prestige, or you want this idea of security, whatever those things are, you have to succumb to the parasite, right? And at that point, it's energetic. And everybody who wants these things is eventually kind of overtaken. Like, look at George Soros. I'll use George Soros as an example. Hopefully I don't freeze. But if you go back and look at George Soros, when he was a youth, what did he do with the Polish army or the Germans?
Sold out his fellow Jews.
That's right. Why? He says, well, if I didn't do it, somebody else would. I mean, that's really what he was saying, right?
Right. That's right.
That's the parasite in action.
Yep. Right.
That is the parasite in action. And what's unfortunate is that we have been infested by this parasite. And I think the parasite isn't even from this world. And my sense is that it infests worlds, it consumes worlds, and then it moves on to the next world. It finds a host, and then the host then sends out their parasitic array, whatever that is. And then it destroys the world and moves on to the next world. I think that's really what we're dealing with.
Yeah,
that's
man.
a great. Go
Great.
ahead, Giuseppe.
Yeah. Go ahead, Scorpio.
No, you first. Go ahead.
Oh, Robert, I think that is so insightful, because if you look at the effort by the Zionist globalists, communists, for the last 150 years at least, to hone their ability to conduct mind control and influence people both overtly and subliminally, and take control and infect them with that energetic version of the physical parasite. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think there is an otherworldly element to this. There does seem to be some kind of odd connection between so-called like a reptilian entity of some kind and the Khazarian Jews. There is sort of a reptilian look many of these people have, and I believe some of the stories to be true about them actually being from a different sort of genetic makeup that's not entirely human. That could go back to the Bible in several ways, several allegorical stories, or possibly more in the Bible about this. And I've actually had a firsthand experience seeing someone who was from a very powerful and well-known family actually appear to be a reptilian for a split second or two. It was really quite bizarre.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before. So this black cube is also known as the Chintamani Stone, by the way, and you can look it up, and it has like this, very powerful kind of mythological resonance. And if that's true, Dave, I think this is what we're talking about. I think it's the infestation of this parasitic energy that may have some connection to this kind of reptilian consciousness, quite possibly. And what's also interesting, if you look at bloodlines, let's take bloodlines for an example. There's a very strong pressure for Jewish families to intermarry, right? Like, you don't really want to marry outside of your religion or your culture, or however we want to shape Judaism, right? So if that's true, then what happens is that this kind of original, let's call it the original sin or the original infestation, which we're talking about and dealing with, which spreads out to the rest of the planet, basically stays for the most part in kind of one lineage and, kind of one manifestation of that lineage. And so, and there's this pressure to continue to maintain that, right? And I'm not saying that, because I have a lot of friends who are Jewish and they're really good people. They're really, and some of them I love to death, right? And they may hear this and they may say, what the hell is going on? What is he talking about? And what I would say is that each and every one of us, whoever we are, whether we're white or Christian or black, whatever, like we have to take a look at ourselves. And we have to take a look at our level of complicity in continuing the illusion of the life that we're living on this planet. Like for me, as an American, and looking at this idea of the patriotic story or the freedom story, which I think is a load of shit, right? And I have to look at the fact that people who, maybe come from a certain part of Europe, my genetics are Irish and Scot and Dutch and some Welsh, right? So I look at the people who represent my group and I see them as fucking sellouts. Whether they're Freemasons or high-level bankers that got their degrees from Ivy League schools, right? I just can't look at somebody else and go, oh, well, they're cool, right? They're they look like me. No, they've got some skin in this game. So we all have to look at our own complicity and the complicity of our groups. So when we talk about like Jewish power, we talk about this idea of a particular group that is responsible for the world's ills. And I do believe we got to bring that into the conversation, right? That's important. But as a people, right? As a people, you've got to separate this out a little bit. And I've got some Jewish friends who would totally agree with me on this subject, by the way, completely agree. Emily Moore is a good friend of mine, and we've had this discussion, and she totally agrees with me. My buddy Lawrence in Oklahoma City, his father was a famous painter from upstate New York, and he was a socialist and Jewish, and Lawrence agrees with me, right? So what we're getting at here is trying to get beneath the surface of our conditioning. And that if we all took a good look about the complicit nature of the people that represent us, I think we can get somewhere. Like Giuseppe, you were talking about this collusion between black elites and the NAACP and Jewish power. Dude, it's going on today, right? All the way up to the present, right? Mm-hmm. Right now. You have somebody like, what's his name? Chavez, from California, the great union organizer, right? Cesar Chavez. Yeah. Like that guy's got skeletons in his closet, right? He's a socialist. Yep. He's connected to the same group, the same organizing principle. So what we need to do is we need to, as a people, and again, I'm going to include Jewish people in this group as well. We all need to step back. We need to look at this like hierarchy and these people that represent us theoretically and at a higher level sell us out all the fuck common. I've got nothing in common with Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham or Joe Biden. I've got nothing in common with these people just because we share the same pigmentation and maybe they may be Protestant too, and I just happen to be baptized, right? This is where the work needs to take place. And so, yeah, there's this rubric that we're looking at, and it may start with a particular group, but then you have all these enablers that are part of the parasitic network.
I think Robert's point, Dave, and Robert, when you unfreeze, is impeccable. Probably 95% of Americans of every ilk want what this country is purported to stand for, an opportunity to work hard and get ahead, to have safe neighborhoods, family not threatened, and everything you look at in your description of the hierarchical pyramid, everything that the vast majority of citizens in this country and every first world country want is being destroyed, eaten away by this evil cancer. And even I have good friends who are Jews historically, but on the other hand, you look at how they can be called as saying him, and to me the test there should be, what the heck, why is somebody calling me now? This is ridiculous.
Is that Rev Radio?
I don't know who that was, but to finish my point that we should be able to have a discussion, but they, even though they're out of the shadows, this hidden hand, and they're going for the complete control of the world with this Great Reset agenda. How many Jews, including your friends and my friends, if you were to say to them, look, the Holocaust is a massive scam that benefits you to a lesser degree, but massively benefits these Satanists, these otherworldly parasites, how many will agree, oh yeah, right, no, the Holocaust never happened? It's like, so I think that there's a big hill to climb when it comes to Jews in this society, and if this starts to unravel, they're not going to be in a good position.
I think it's a really good point, Dave. I want to get your take on that. And here's my follow up to that. Certain groups, I think, or certain individuals are going to be more geared to, taking a cold shower, right? Like that's a cold shower. And I don't know whether that has to do with being, naturally preordained to go there. I know I am. That's kind of how I've always been.
Me too.
Right. But for some people, they're not ready to take the cold shower. So you got to help these people along a little bit. And you've got to kind of piecemeal them a little bit at a time, And I will share a story. This is a personal friend of mine, and she might be listening to this, but she comes from that world, right? She comes from that world. And I've been watching her evolve, and I've been watching her say no to the vaccine. And everybody around her in her community is getting vaccinated, right? She's been saying no. She's been pushing back. So I'm not going to do this. And then she just broke up with her boyfriend, who would be the epitome of probably what you're talking about, Giuseppe, right? And she broke up the relationship because of this kind of very insular world that she felt that she was being trapped in. And who knows where she goes with her evolution from this point forward. And I think there are certain people in these groups that we're talking about that are able to have these discussions. But we're talking about really entrenched programming, hardcore generational programming that isn't ready for the cold shower. So, I'm not willing to write this, group of people off. They need to come along, right? We need to have as many people as part of our coalition as possible. And I think there are different people that are ready for the cold shower and some people that are ready for the lukewarm shower. And if they could take the cold shower, give it to them. If not, meet them where they're at.
Well, Robert, I think you bring up a really important point that not many people address. And first of all, I think we have to view every person as an individual. But the problem many Jews face, and I've known plenty of Jews being involved in, the arts and the creative world, is that they're ostracized. The ones that try to break away from this multi-generational programming, as you state, are ostracized, and very severely, in fact, and actually hated by those around them. So that's a real problem for, many people from that world, so-called waking up. And but yeah, the most important thing is we're all individuals, and we have to all break away from the programming that we've been brought up with, not just Jews. I agree with that completely. The problem is that this power really emanates from the dark banking, international banking cabal, and we're talking about a very select group of people, not your average Jew walk around the street. They're just sort of mind controlled like everyone else, only they're mind controlled in a very sort of tribalistic way. They're them first and everyone else second. That's one of the basic tenets of the Talmud. And so it's a very complex thing that we're talking about here. And I'm glad to hear it addressed, because you're one of the few people I hear actually bring up that aspect. We all have to be deprogrammed. And the question is, what side, I guess the question is, what kind of civilization do we want to live in? That's a complicated question, because not everyone's going to come down on that on the same, side, essentially. So I think there is, part of what's happening here is there's a great separation happening between people who truly want to have a free civilization and those who want to be sort of controlled by the government and are actually willing to inject themselves with a death serum voluntarily. No one's forcing anyone to take that shot. It may be under false information and coercion, but no one is being forced. It's all being done voluntarily. And because people follow so-called authority figures who are deliberately steering us in the wrong direction.
Those are great points, Dave. I think Robert froze again. There he is.
Yeah, I froze again. So I think this idea of conditioning is, I think, the biggest piece that we can encounter, right? I mean, we all have some skin in the game with it, and perhaps some people may have more skin in the game with their deconditioning, right? Like certain groups will say, well, I'm a victim. I can't get ahead. This country is inherently racist, and because of that, I'll never stand a chance. Yeah, right. Well, what other country in the world would allow you to make literally hundreds of millions of dollars and then allow you to flip your middle finger at the country, right? There's not many countries in the world that can do that. I'm specifically thinking of Colin Kaepernick, by the way. So
what a fraud and a hypocrite he is.
Yeah. So from Wisconsin, Giuseppe, originally.
I know that. Yeah.
So this is what I'm talking about, right? I mean, this is, again, this programming that has become deeply ingrained. And by the way, this programming, at least with the groups that I'm talking about, has this programming really become more socially entrenched than at any other time. We're all around the same age. And when I grew up, I grew up in California. So, and I know you grew up in Wisconsin, right, Giuseppe?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And Dave, did you grow up in California?
Yeah. I was born in California, Northern California. But yeah, I moved around quite a bit too. But California, I've spent more than half my life in California.
So where were you born in Northern California?
In the San Francisco Bay Area, Burlingame.
Okay. I know Burlingame. I went to elementary school in Millbrae, which is just up the road from Burlingame. Yeah. So you know what it's like. California was incredibly diverse in the 1970s. I don't know what the situation was like in Wisconsin, Giuseppe. You might have busing up there. I don't know. But I grew up with that, and you probably grew up with it, Dave. It was like no big deal, right? I mean, for the most part, it was like, okay, we have this group, this group, this group. We get high together. We don't get high together. You go off, you do your thing. Maybe we meet at parties. It was no big deal. But over the last 8 years, we've been thrown into this hardcore echo chamber where the volume has been turned up and this next level programming has taken place. But I think we still have to get down and break down our conditioning and our programming. And a lot of it, and for a particular group that we started this discussion with, I think is really important. Like if we're going to live together in a free world, in a world where, we're as enlightened as we possibly can be in our lives, whether they're our parents, whether they're our culture, with their belief system. And if they're limiting and they're controlling, we've got to eradicate them.
I guess I'll jump in. Your points are once again really compelling. I think what we've witnessed by the same satanic parasites is a multi-tiered attack on our way of life.
Yep.
They have instituted a massive wealth transfer that destroyed the working class and moved many people into the working poor. They're now eating away at the bottom 60% of the middle class and creating a middle class that is highly specialized with, if you're a computer programmer or some skill that the globalists need, you're well taken care of. But they're literally destroying countless entrepreneurs, small restaurants, stores, people. So and the wealth transfer is stunning. At the same time, they've conducted psychological operations. Once again, the cancer that they are, they've taken control of education. And a wonderful hero, Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, who just died in the last week, 10 days, was warning about this in the 80s, that the communists are infiltrating education, and the Jew communists have, taken over higher education around that time, and they instituted the farcical politically correct speech, which now has metastasized into cancel culture and virtue signaling. And what, when we grew up, we had civics classes. We understood you're responsible for your own existence, and you should be loyal to your family first, and then your extended family, and then your neighborhood and your community, and in no way be loyal to corporations and celebrities and all this other mind fuckery. I guess we can swear on this show. Yeah. And so what we have seen is, in just a couple generations, we've seen the average white turned into a self-absorbed, narcissistic, shallow, vacuous shithead who is either on the side of the Jewish communist left and feels like the nanny state needs to take care of them, or we have the vacuous, goofy, red, white, and blue boxer short patriot who loved Reagan and loved Trump and all the time can't even think their way out of the idea that they've been played, and they are could be the saving grace as a movement because they're literally the majority of the country. But instead, they like to get together and go to barbecues and listen to frauds like the clown, the Patriot Streetwalker, or he was well-intentioned, but Robert David Steele getting in that bus, and they'd go to barbecues out at the park and everybody say, we're going to save our country and let's have a few beers. That's not how you do it. So once again, controlled opposition, both sides being controlled by this chicken swinging parasite.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Yep. Dave?
Well, yeah, and this is a really high level conversation you're conducting here, Robert, and it's an honor to be part of it along with Giuseppe. Yeah. I think the other thing we need to look at too is that at the top, these people that claim, that run the banking cabal, they claim to be, Jewish, but they're really not. These people are Satanists, and they hide behind the average Jew, much like, Freemasonry works. You've got the dark members at the top of Freemasonry who are Satanists. It says so in some of their books that they actually worship Lucifer. But then you have your average Freemason who's first, second, or third degree Freemason. It's really just a social club for most of those guys. They go on a little esoteric journeys here, but for the most part, it's just a social club, and they really have no idea the nefarious nature of the organization that they're actually involved in. So there's certainly sort of a correlation or a similarity between how Judaism works and Freemasonry works. But again, it's not your average Jew is not what we're talking about here. And it's really important to point that out. It's not about hate. This whole notion of hate speech is absurd, and it's nothing more than an attempt to control the parameters of the conversation and prevent discussions like you and I are having right now.
I think Robert's frozen until he comes back. Dave, what you're describing is the mongrelization of this cancer eating this society. And what we have is, all these victims and oh, I need my compensation, my reparations. Well, why don't you work hard and make a plan, learn how to code? That was considered an insult, but that's the best way. There, my wife manages 25 really diverse young people. They've all learned to code. They can't believe their good fortune to get hired by a Beltway bandit and got high level social clearance, above top secret clearance. They're black, they're Asian, they're everything, and they get it. They've got parents who let them live at home. The whole stereotype that blacks can't do this, that Asians can only do this, that Mexican, it's all a farce. It's all creating this divide and conquer strategy that distracts everything away from the vile satanic chicken swingers who are at the same time creating the massive bubbles, destroying the fabric of society. As when we did the interview with E. Michael Jones, he goes, "You were a social experiment. They destroyed your Italian neighborhood. They destroyed the Irish neighborhood." Busing is bullshit. I mean, when Robert comes back, we'll have to see what he says about if he's in favor of busing. Busing was absolutely a Jew scam, once again, trying to destroy the traditional ethnic neighborhoods. I mean, I loved the first 10 years of my life living in an Italian neighborhood, and then to have busing and all this other bullshit, this communist bullshit, destroy the neighborhoods and turn them into slums. You know what they should have done is just challenge and fund the black neighborhoods to take care of themselves, to have their own schools and have their own teachers and become better than the typical factory worker. They should put themselves ahead of the curve instead of, just being Jew puppets to tier 2 victims, as Whoopi Goldberg learned the hard way, that you can't question the eternal victim, the chicken swinger. That was a hilarious little escapade the last couple of weeks. Your thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, well, it looks like Robert's actually dropped off the call here, so
yeah, I don't know.
No longer showing up on the dashboard.
Right. I mean, I think he can come back just by clicking on the same link we have. Here he comes. Here
we go.
Yeah. Hey. Sorry about that. I don't. My internet for the last 48 hours has been shit.
Oh yeah, man. We understand.
So
when you were gone, I don't know if you could hear or not, but you brought up when I was in Milwaukee and the whole idea of forced busing, and that was the worst thing that ever happened. I mean, like, we had E. Michael Jones on some of our shows, and he goes, "You were victims of a social experiment, man. The Jew intentionally destroyed your neighborhood." And I loved living in the Italian neighborhood the first 10, 11 years of my life. And there should have never been forced busing. And that's all liberal bullshit. And I used to be a liberal. Well, I was always a progressive. I never liked whiny liberals. But the point is what should have been done if the Jew wasn't in control of this whole sinister agenda. They should have challenged the blacks and funded them to create their own schools and become as good, if not better, than the whites, instead of forcing the blacks into our schools and our neighborhoods, which was just utter horse shit.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have to deal with busing because of just the ethnic makeup of where I went to school. Mm-hmm. It just, we were already kind of bust.
Yeah.
But it was very divisive. It divided black families.
Right.
Like, they weren't really into sending their kids to white schools. And the white families were not into sending their kids to black schools. I mean, it was a social experiment. If you want to really, drill down into who this is, you go to the Frankfurt School. I mean, these are the people that basically took their programs, Mac Horkheimer, Antonio Gramsci, right? These are the social Marxists. These are the critical theory people.
Right.
These are the people that
where Robert's going, he should be back in a second, Dave, is he's absolutely right. I mean, this cancer that eats into everything. Oh, he's back. Okay.
Yeah. So it's their ideas, right? It's their ideas around diversity, their ideas around inclusion, and really what it's about watering down all of these very significant ethnic groups.
Except for themselves.
Right. Exactly. That's the one piece that never really gets discussed. And I talked about this on previous shows. And that's the one piece that people don't really, how they had these ethnic neighborhoods in New York and they got blown out, right? And they wound up going to the suburbs, and like the Italians or the Polish or the Irish. And there's something to be said about celebrating one's ethnic heritage, right? But then they come in, they want to water it down, they want to make this diverse society, dilute it, and nobody knows who the fuck they are at that point, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, and what they're actually doing is creating the opposite of a diverse society. They're creating a monoculture, which is the exact opposite of diversity. It looks diverse, but it's actually putting everybody into one culture, one way of thinking, one way of being. While of course, the Jews keep their ethnic neighborhoods, they keep their ethnic strength and their tribal nature, while everyone else is sort of put into this sort of mongrelized encampment where nobody really likes each other, because once you force people to live together, there's always going to be resentment. Once you force people to go to school together in an unnatural state, you're going to have tension and problems. And again, this comes down to this control the federal government has over our lives. They have no right to force some kid to get on a bus and go to a different school when they don't want to. And I think one of the big things that's shaping up for me is I don't think we need a federal government. I don't think the federal government is repairable. I don't think it's reformable. There's plenty of power within all the state governments to enact all the basic functions of government. And if you had that, you'd have sort of like 50 different, test tubes or laboratories to see what kind of civilization works the best. Instead, you have this overarching centralized power that really has been captured by a foreign entity, and it's no longer even really pretending to work for the good of the American people. And that's not anywhere better illustrated than what's happening right now in Ukraine. I mean, our federal government has forced this issue and getting us involved in a war for absolutely no reason other than, Ukraine has to be part of NATO. Oh, really? I don't think anyone cares.
Right. Absolutely. And Dave, I think you just, got to ground zero here with the federal government. I mean, this is it. I mean, just limit what they do. Like, what should they do? They should have interstate commerce rules and regulations. They should have treaties with other nations. They should probably have a standing army and some borders, and that's about it. That's really about it.
Well, yeah, but Jefferson warned against a standing army. This thing was more dangerous than anything else. You could have, state militias that would come together when America's under attack. America hasn't really ever been under attack externally, only internally.
Probably a better idea. So we'll take the standing army off. We'll bring it into the state militias, but just limit the power, right? Interstate commerce. Get rid. State taxes are probably going to be better spent on the repair of that state. Giuseppe, what's your temperature on this?
I think you guys are making just 100% accurate points. I mean, Dave is right. The federal government is controlled by the flotsam and jetsam of fringe society. I mean, Mitch McConnell, raging homosexual, call him the pink slipper because that look on his face of his prolapsed rectum. He's got his beard, Chinese wife, and she got probably in all likelihood artificially inseminated. He's a complete puppet of the triad opium criminal cabals over in China and the Far East, and he serves them 100%. He serves his own agenda 100%. Lindsey Graham was outed by the professional homosexual prostitutes because he didn't pay one, and he outed him, and he's known as Lady G. Has a huge, spends a lot of money on getting banged in the butt by these professionals, and he doesn't serve the people of South Carolina. If the people of South Carolina would wake up, they would have voted him out long ago. And that shows just how pathetically detached the flotsam and jetsam, the homosexual, the dual citizen traitor who control and infest the federal government at all levels from middle management on up are not in any way loyal to this country and the citizens of this country. They're loyal to the globalists and putting more digits in their own bank accounts and amassing their own petty tyrannical power.
Yeah. Again, we're in agreement here. Getting back to your point around this idea of like a certain community that stays intact while these other communities get atomized, they get diluted by the introduction of new groups, even though they don't want those groups there particularly, right? So one time I was on a flight from San Francisco to Frankfurt, and I sat next to this guy in the plane, and he was I think he was born in Russia. He was a Russian Jew, right? Parents were definitely born in Russia. And he graduated from Stanford. He had a degree in computer science. And so I sat next to him the entire flight, and I got to learn a little bit about this guy. And the first thing that he was very proud of was the fact that he didn't need to have a suitcase because he had an apartment in Frankfurt where he had clothes waiting for him. So he was like this, this international traveler, right? This nomadic soul. All right, fine. That's cool. Whatever. So I asked him, I said, well, what did you study and how did you make your money? He said, well, I created, it's almost a cliche. He said, I created a computer program, and then the program was then sold to collection companies. And then what they would do is that they would basically figure out and so the people that they thought would be the easiest and the least labor intensive to collect from went to the top of the list. And then the ones that they'd probably never get to were way down at the bottom. So his company actually collated that information and then was able to establish those hierarchies. So he made a lot of money off of it, right? Which is kind of a cliche in a weird way, right? So we had this talk, and he says, oh, I really love this country so much. And I said, well, if we got into a war, would you allow your son and daughter to fight and die for this country? And that question really threw him for a loop. It was like he didn't know what to say about that. And they said, well, that's what happens. Like when you're an American, you're basically tasked with defending the country. And so if you're here and you're an American and you love it, then that's what you would do. You would allow your son and daughter to fight for the country that you love and live in. And so we moved on to other parts of the conversation. And then, but not in a bad way, right?
Yeah.
So then he said, oh, I love Ashland, Oregon. I'm like, really? What do you like? Oh, I love the Shakespeare Festival, and I love the beauty of the place, and it's so charming. So why don't you move there if you love it so much? And he said, well, I couldn't do that. Well, why not? Well, because there's a group of us and we all kind of live together. I mean, basically what he's saying is that there are a bunch of people like him who live in around the Stanford area, right? And they get to have their little enclave.
Yep.
So when I offered him an opportunity to go live in this place that he absolutely loved, he was much more willing to stay. And by the way, most people are like that. I'm not just singling him out, right? But that's to your point, right? They're like, he was in his enclave. And then the one point on about, I said, look, here we go again. If they didn't have the Treaty of Versailles and they didn't hit the Germans with crippling sanctions, there is no Hitler. Okay.
Right.
There is no Hitler. We're not having this discussion.
Agreed.
So, and he got really quiet about that. Like he had to think about that. So that wasn't the cold shower moment for the guy. I was kind of walking him into the lukewarm shower.
Right. Well, Scorpio, while we're waiting for Robert to unfreeze, I mean, that is a classic, Hebrew parasite figuring out a way to make easy money off people who in financial hardship. I mean, but that's just a hateful trope, though.
It was just a cliche. I'm sorry. It was a cliche. It's like you couldn't have put your computer science degree to better use than
Robert. That's who they are. I mean, it's like what they do. And
it's like money lending on steroids, man. Come on. Let's break the mold, brother. Come on. Let's go.
Yeah. Scorpio. Yeah. Your thoughts.
That's a very telling story.
No kidding.
And it sort of denotes this kind of personality that Henry Ford talked about in his book, The International Jew. Actually, it was a series of articles that later became a booklet. It's just a trope, but this sort of stereotyping often has a root of truth, or it wouldn't exist as a stereotype. People would just reject it flat out. So there has to always be a little root of truth in some of these things. So that's an interesting story, Robert. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting trip to sit next to this guy, and he wasn't unlikable, right? But you could tell that there was a part of him, for all of his so-called education and smarts, that he was really naive.
Yeah,
that there was a naivete. And maybe it's a naivete that was cultivated inside of his own little bubble, right?
Yeah, well, and the point about the Treaty of Versailles, that's a very good point about Hitler. But of course, the other element too was the Weimar Republic and the degeneracy.
I was just going to jump into that because we are living in the fucking Weimar Republic right now.
Weimerica.
Exactly. The degeneracy of it, and how the average German was really pushed out of their own civilization. I mean, they were forced, into poverty on the edges of this foreign entity that had taken over their country. That's the other big element that, combined with, as you point out, the Treaty of Versailles, that created the sort of creation of someone like Hitler. Unfortunately, absolutely.
Giuseppe, you want to add to that?
What I would like to see, Robert, I guess, as the show winding down, is that I look for fairness. Everything that the internationalist Jew does to us and the Germans and the French and the English, I think we should just turn about as fair play and apply the same Machiavellian cutthroat treatment to themselves, and let's see how that goes for them.
Well, I don't think that they would like it a whole lot, and we probably feel some immediate backlash around the entire thing, whatever that would be. But we're in a period of time where we're beginning to wake up, right? We're beginning to wake up. We're beginning to kind of put some of these pieces together. A lot of people spend a lot of time on the internet during COVID. And, they went down some rabbit holes, and maybe they put some things together, right? We just need to put all these pieces together. And I think ultimately, if we want to have some takeaway for today's show, that I'm going to try to make a universal takeaway for everybody, is that we got to dismantle this banking system. We got to dismantle BlackRock, the Federal Reserve, the ESG shit that's coming through BlackRock, which is basically a social credit score for corporations. And that's what we got to do. Yep. This is really important. And if you got a guy by the name of Larry Fink, who is running a corporation like that,
yep.
He's got to get we have to take these things down. We have to take them out. And I think the only thing that we can really do is to move along this idea of Asha Logos and this parallel society, right? We've got to start pulling out. We got to start pulling out of their system.
Yep.
And I don't care what color you are, right? You could be black, you could be white, you could be brown, you're Christian, I don't care. Yep. Let's say you're somebody who's Jewish and you look around and go, look, these people are driving me nuts. I don't want any part of this. Get on board. We got to start creating a parallel world where we are not participating in their system. And that's ultimately how we get rid of the parasite. Yes. We don't feed it sugar. We don't feed it gluten. We don't feed it alcohol, and it fucking dies off. This is what we have to do.
Yeah. And you know, you think about it too, central banking, fractional reserve central banking, as we know it, is nothing more than legalized criminality. That's really what it is. And that's sort of the starting point of understanding. Absolutely. And we do have to start creating our own systems that are outside this framework. And the other thing that's becoming clear to people that take the time to look into it is that the number of hands on the levers of power, it's far fewer than we've been told.
It's a great point.
Far fewer. And, you know, you've got BlackRock and Vanguard, each one of them being the primary stakeholder in the other's company. So it's really just one company. The amount of wealth and assets those two companies manage alone is just astronomical. And of course, Larry Fink was, a graduate of the WEF, World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders program back in the 90s. And of course, Klaus Schwab himself is closely connected to the Rothschilds, and in fact may actually be sort of a cousin of the Rothschilds.
Yep. I agree. And Larry, there's nothing special about Larry Fink. I mean, you know, he was a middling trader until they just elevated him and put him in a position of power.
Well, just like Bezos, just like Musk, just like Bill Gates, all of them.
They're all middling. Like Gates didn't do anything. He stole somebody's program, made a few tweaks, had his father at Boeing make a pitch, right, to, who was it? Was it IBM, or I think it might have been IBM. And that was it, right? Yep. He just hijacked. And then he wanted to fuck over Paul Allen.
Oh, badly. Yeah.
And I think the point you're getting to here, Robert, is that these billionaires that they put out for us to look at as these are the most powerful men in the world, they're just sort of propped up actors.
They're nothing.
On
they're
a stage.
Nothing.
And
they're nothing.
If you look at all of their stories, not just Bill Gates, Elon Musk, all of them, their stories don't really add up.
Yep.
Right. And Elon Musk creates some bullshit company and he gets funded big time for it in Silicon Valley, sells it for, stupid Federal Reserve dollars. And then he's off and running. Right. I mean, the stories just don't add up at all.
No, they don't. And of course, Elon Musk's maternal grandfather was the founder of the technocracy movement in Canada. And he got his ass kicked out of Canada back in the 1930s because at the time, Canada still had a nationalistic government. That's how the Musk family ended up in South Africa. So it's awfully odd that, his grandfather created this system, or at least helped create this system that they want to enact worldwide with this technocracy movement. That was Elon Musk's maternal grandfather.
It's interesting. An anagram of Musk is scum.
There you go. That's good. Well, Robert, true honor to be on your show. Was wonderful. I'd love to come back anytime. How about you, Scorpio?
Oh, absolutely. This was a really high level discussion. And I thought
really good.
Robert brought some really fascinating questions and points into the conversation that aren't often talked about. So I really like original thinking, and and so great show, very high level discussion. It was an honor to be part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Giuseppe, who do you have on today? Who's your guest today?
Coming up in 3 hours on the Perfect Triangle is Robert Ravolt from RBN's Incendiary Radio, combined with the great Frederick C. Blackburn of Blackbird Nine's Breakfast Club, and it's going to be a great show. And of course, my brother from another mother, Dave Scorpio, is co-host.
And David, who do you have slated for your show tomorrow?
Well, the coming tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Studio A Revolution Radio, will be the great Dr. James Fetzer, author of many books and certainly a legend within the truth movement. And a man that I would call a friend as well.
Right. Robert's frozen. He'll be back any moment, but yeah. Gonna be two good shows. And Robert's coming back to the Perfect Triangle on the 18th of March, and I know you want to schedule Robert for Operation Scorpio, which will be great. This guy is just got it going on so many levels. Really, and really great that we've met him and we're getting to be friends with him and allies, and this is good stuff.
Oh yeah. And a lot of deep original thinking. That's what we need. We need people who come up with their own ideas and really go deep into a question without fear. And that's, I think, what we did today.
I think we did a pretty good job of handling a pretty charged subject, and had a number of different facets that we're able to look at this Gordian knot with. Right, it's a Gordian knot.
It is a Gordian knot, without a doubt.
Yeah. All right, brothers, I love you, and
love you too.
We'll see you back on either here or there or wherever we meet again.
And great coming back to the Perfect Triangle on the 18th of March. It's going to be a great show.
It's going to be cool. All right. You take care, guys.
You too. Have a great weekend.
All right. That was the great Giuseppe and Dave. And I'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. Until then, use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to set what's possible.